Now, right now I'm going to work as a software architect. Let me say I'm the lead on this software solution. If I'm a smaller team, I'm the software developer. I have to begin modeling this out such that it can be our single source of truth for any other developer. This can happen maybe if I'm handing over, I don't need someone to look into code and hustle. They can just come on a documentation like this and see what I set out, what I built. So if a bigger project, you do this using a software architect. So first thing we do is define our data contracts. There would be data tables in your database, but I'm calling them data contracts for now because they're different types. So I've created one for transaction. It comes with what would be a primary key, which is a transaction identifier in this case. Let me define the different properties in this table or in this data contract. So a type of transaction would be one. Item, this would be the narration, which we talked about. And what else? Yeah, the date we created this, or the timestamp. So let me name it something along the lines of this created at. I think that would work well. Again, you always refer to the main documentation that was given to you. It comes on this functional view. So there I was just verifying my facts. So I defined the data types. So this would be a date time for created at, and the item, this would be essentially the narrative. Basically, if it is a credit, this would be the source of income. And if it's a debit, this would be the item we are spending on, as defined by the documentation. So we stick to the facts. So this is just a string, since it's just going to be a narration. The type of transaction, this is either debit or credit. In your database, you deal with something this using an enum. But in this case, we have something we call a terminology in Uniscale that works as an enum. So you come and define the enums. So in this case, just going to be debit, terminology description, terminology code, or it could be credit. Nice. So right there, if you want to define the sample, but that is done. Then after this, we go ahead and define our endpoints that will serve this service flow. So in this case, I'm going to come down and look for link endpoint right there. And we create a new endpoint. We have two types of endpoints: message types and request response. A message type takes in input but doesn't return an output. You just need a 200 from it. A request response handles, you pass it some input data, it returns you an output. Inputs, message type request, message type endpoint are usually very beneficial for things like forms, where you just need to get a success. So let me define that this endpoint will store transactions. I've called it endpoint new transaction, and the input for this is going to be, we're going to define, put in, maybe we're going to create what we would call a property group type of contract. So we're going to create one for our input. It comes pre-named new transaction input. We pass in the item and the type of transaction. So you can create that endpoint, but and it's created and the endpoint is there. But at this point, I believe I noticed that we needed to create created at, because that could be important, because this could be an old transaction. So what I did is I called upon the data contract, added in the created at this point, so that we account for it as well, because this can be pre-filled before the transaction happened. So there we have it. We have our endpoint, takes in new transaction input, which is that. So we go ahead and begin creating a new endpoint for listing our what we would call our statement. But yes, if you notice, there's a value object data contract that is called transaction summary I had created before. So there was a skip here. So the reason for that was I was trying to see the best way I can create the endpoint for giving us, let's call it handling the input, the output of the transactions. So I thought maybe the summary would have that plus that, but that being the transaction summary and the list of the transactions, but that can be computed. So in this case, what I have resolved to is, as I'm going to remove that transaction summary, the input is going to be a date range, which I'm adding right now. So basically a start date and end date. So that will be my input for now. Define them as date times or dates, sorry, because usually date range pickers work with dates. Some do time, but let me just work with the date. So that's our endpoint. I'm going to define the input of this endpoint, get transactions. That's going to take in our date range. And you see, and then the output at this point, I am going to just get as the transactions, the whole aggregate. And I want multiple of them, so cardinality is going to be multiple. And then we can always get the transaction summary once we get that list. The UI can always calculate that information, so we don't need the transaction summary I came up with, so we can delete that. Nice. So yeah, at this point I believe we already have our endpoints and we're done with all the work we need for these endpoints. So at this point you can ready everything you've done and approve it thereafter. So we ready everything that we're happy with what we've done, and at this point you can approve, define a revision title. This will come in handy such that in the event of future updates or future changes, they can create new revisions, kind of like a new commit, and you keep track of your work. So in this case we're storing this revision. It is now everything has been padlocked, locked, and then we can come to the SDK and generate an SDK for developers to begin working with. I am primarily a Node developer and a PHP developer. I also know some Java, so I've chosen those languages in this case. And then I'm going to generate an SDK for that. Save changes and an SDK begins generating. As you can notice, there will be instructions for all the languages involved selected. Give it some bit of a second here. The PHP is ready, so the instructions for PHP are there. To set it up in your project, this can be a Laravel project, native PHP, so it uses Composer, and the other is Java is ready as well. You set up your Maven settings in here and install it as a package, same with npm. Thank you. Hi everyone, hope you enjoyed that video. Don't forget, subscribe, like, all that, comment, ask questions in the comment section. I'll be happy to answer them. Yeah, have a good one.